How can a single careless comparison at an anniversary party unravel years of marriage in one night? What happens when the laughter dies, and the man you tried to humiliate quietly gathers every receipt, until the only joke left is on you? I should have known something was wrong when Owen's smile didn't reach his eyes during my anniversary speech, but I was riding high on champagne and the attention of our 50 guests, feeling witty and sophisticated in my emerald dress that cost more than Owen would ever spend on himself. 5 wonderful years with my husband, I announced, raising my glass, as conversations quieted around our private dining room at Romano's. The crystal chandelier cast perfect lighting, and I felt like the star of my own romantic comedy. Owen is absolutely wonderful, not quite as adventurous as Micah was, but wonderful nonetheless. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I'd meant it as a playful comparison, a little inside joke that would make me seem worldly and interesting. Micah had been my college boyfriend, the musician with the motorcycle who wrote songs about my eyes. Owen was steady, reliable, safe. The laughter I expected never came. Instead, 50 faces stared back at me with expressions ranging from shock to secondhand embarrassment. My mother, Gloria, was the only one smiling, raising her own glass with a defiant "cheers," but even she looked uncertain. I found Owen's face in the crowd. His champagne glass had stopped halfway to his lips, and that practiced smile he wore at work functions had completely dissolved. For just a moment, I saw something raw and hurt flash across his features before he carefully set down his glass. "To 5 years," he said quietly, his voice steady but hollow. The room erupted in awkward applause, conversations resuming with forced enthusiasm. But the damage was done. I could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way Owen's sister Natalie shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "Mommy, why does everyone look sad?" Our 7-year-old daughter Ava tugged at my dress, her big brown eyes confused. "They're not sad, sweetheart. They're just surprised by Mommy's joke." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Owen had moved to the far end of our table, making polite conversation with his colleagues while carefully avoiding my gaze. Every time I tried to catch his attention, he found something else to focus on. My best friend Tara squeezed my arm. "Don't worry about it, Zeph. He'll get over it. Men are so sensitive about their egos." I nodded, but a cold knot was forming in my stomach. I'd crossed a line, and everyone in the room knew it except me. Or at least, except the part of me that was willing to admit it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. When we finally got home, Owen went straight to our bedroom while I tucked Ava into bed. "Is Daddy mad at you?" she asked as I pulled her covers up to her chin. "No, baby. Daddy's just tired." But when I slipped into our bedroom an hour later, Owen was lying on his side facing the wall. I reached for him, my hand finding his shoulder in the darkness. "Owen, are you awake?" He didn't respond, but I could tell from his breathing that he wasn't asleep. I pressed closer, trying to bridge the sudden chasm between us. "I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't mean anything by it. You know that, right?" Still nothing, just the sound of his breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside our window. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the back of his head and trying to understand why everyone had reacted so strongly to what I considered a harmless comment. So, what if I'd mentioned Micah? It wasn't like I was still in love with him. It was ancient history, college stuff that had nothing to do with my real life. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the image of Owen's face when I'd said those words. The way his smile had crumbled. The way he'd looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. I told myself he'd get over it. He always did. I was wrong about a lot of things that night, but mostly I was wrong about Owen. The next morning, Owen was already gone when I woke up. His coffee mug sat in the sink, and there was a note on the counter. "Taking Ava to school. Client meeting all day. Don't wait up." It was Tuesday. Owen never had client meetings on Tuesdays. I tried calling him around lunch, but it went straight to voicemail. When I called his office, his assistant Janet said he was unavailable, in that polite but final tone that meant don't ask again. By the time I picked up Ava from school, my anxiety had morphed into irritation. He was being ridiculous, dramatic. It was one little comment at a party where everyone had been drinking. If anything, he should be flattered that I'd compared him to someone I'd once loved. "Where's Daddy?" Ava asked as we walked to the car. "Working late, sweetheart." "He said he'd help me with my science project tonight. I'm sure he'll be home soon." But Owen didn't come home until after 9, long after Ava had gone to bed. I was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and an apology prepared. "We need to talk," I said as he hung up his coat. "Do we?" He didn't look at me, just started sorting through the mail on the hall table. "Owen, come on. I said I was sorry." "When did you say that?" The question caught me off guard. "Last night, in bed. I told you I didn't mean anything by it." "You told my back that you didn't mean anything by it, while I was pretending to be asleep because I couldn't bear to look at you." His words hit me like a slap. Owen never talked like this, never let emotion creep into his voice. He was always measured, controlled, rational to a fault. "I was trying to be funny," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "Everyone knows Micah is ancient history." "Do they?" Owen finally turned to face me, and I was shocked by how tired he looked. Because from where I was standing, it sounded like you were telling 50 people that your ex-boyfriend was more exciting than your husband at our anniversary party. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean, Zafira? Help me understand how comparing me unfavorably to your ex-boyfriend in front of our friends and family was supposed to be funny." I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Because when he put it like that, it did sound awful, cruel even. I was nervous. You know how I get when I have to give speeches. I say stupid things. Nervous. He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "You were nervous, so you decided to humiliate me." "I didn't humiliate you." "Didn't you?" Owen pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "Because I've been getting texts all day. Want to hear some of them?" My stomach dropped. From my brother-in-law. "Dude, that was rough. You okay?" From my colleague, Mike. "Hey man, if you need to talk." From your own brother, Julian. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. He kept scrolling, his voice getting quieter with each message. And my personal favorite, from your mother. "Owen, honey, you know Zephyra just has a big personality. Don't take it personally." I wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. "Owen, don't take it personally." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My wife comparing me to her ex-boyfriend at our anniversary party. Why would I take that personally? It wasn't a comparison. It was just, I don't know, word vomit. You know how I am. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm starting to." He headed toward the stairs, and I followed him, panic rising in my chest. "Where are you going?" "To bed. I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Owen, please, can't we move past this? It was one stupid comment." He paused at the bottom of the stairs, his hand on the banister. "You know what the worst part is, Zeph? It's not even that you said it. It's that you don't understand why it was wrong. You're not sorry for hurting me. You're sorry that I'm upset about it." Before I could respond, he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I heard our bedroom door close with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than if he'd slammed it. I sat in the living room until midnight, finishing the bottle of wine and replaying the conversation. He was overreacting, making a mountain out of a molehill. Yes, I'd made a mistake, but marriages were supposed to survive mistakes. We were supposed to be a team. When I finally went upstairs, I found Owen's pillow and half his clothes missing from our room. The spare room door was closed, and when I tried the handle, it was locked. I knocked softly. "Owen?" No answer. Owen, this is ridiculous. Come back to bed. Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the soft clicking of laptop keys. He was working. At midnight, rather than sleeping in the same bed as me. As I lay alone in our king-sized bed, staring at the empty space where my husband should have been, I felt the first real stirring of fear. Not fear that I'd been wrong, I wasn't ready to go there yet, but fear that Owen might not forgive me as easily as I'd assumed. I'd always been able to charm my way out of trouble. A smile, a joke, a little bit of strategic tears, and people came around. It had worked with my parents, my teachers, my bosses, even Owen himself in the early days of our relationship. But something had shifted. The man who'd locked himself in the spare room wasn't the same man who'd fallen for my charms 7 years ago. This Owen was calculating, deliberate, and for the first time in our marriage, I couldn't read him at all. 3 days passed with Owen maintaining his polite distance. He was civil at breakfast, helped Ava with her homework, and made appropriate responses when I tried to engage him in conversation. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a courteous coolness that was somehow worse than anger. I threw myself into work, but even my HR coordinator position felt mundane compared to the drama unfolding at home. My colleague Sandra kept shooting me sympathetic looks across our cubicle wall. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked during our coffee break. "Just a little bump in the road," I said, stirring sugar into my latte. "You know how men are about their egos." But even as I said it, I found myself thinking about Micah. We'd reconnected on social media a few months ago, just innocent likes and comments on each other's posts. He was still in the city, still playing guitar at local venues, still single. The thought came unbidden. Micah would never give me the silent treatment over a harmless comment. That afternoon, I found myself scrolling through his Instagram. Photos of him performing at various coffee shops and bars, his hair still that perfect shade of dark brown that had made my heart flutter in college. In his latest post, he was holding his guitar at what looked like a new cafe downtown. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sent him a direct message. "Hey stranger, is that the new place on 5th Street? I work downtown now. Maybe I'll check it out sometime." He responded within minutes. "Zephyra, yeah, it's called Grind Coffee. I play there Thursday evenings. You should definitely come by." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Sounds fun. Maybe I will." Thursday evening, I told Owen I was having drinks with Tara. It wasn't technically a lie. I'd invited Tara, but she'd cancelled at the last minute to deal with her own relationship drama. Grind Coffee was exactly the kind of place I'd imagined. Exposed brick walls, vintage furniture, and the kind of artfully disheveled aesthetic that screamed authentic. Micah was on the small stage in the corner, his fingers moving across the guitar strings with the same confident grace I remembered. He spotted me immediately, his face lighting up with that crooked smile that had once made me weak in the knees. When his set ended, he made his way over to my table. "I can't believe you actually came," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I can't believe you're still playing the same songs," I teased. "Hey, the classics never go out of style." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "You look amazing, Zeph. Marriage suits you." The compliment sent a warm flutter through my chest. When was the last time Owen had told me I looked amazing? When was the last time he'd looked at me like Micah was looking at me now, like I was the most interesting person in the room? We talked for 2 hours, about college, about his music, about my job. He was working as a freelance sound engineer now, which sounded infinitely more exciting than Owen's financial analysis work. When I mentioned the anniversary party disaster, Micah shook his head sympathetically. "Sounds like he can't handle having a wife who's got some history," he said. "Some guys are threatened by women who've lived a little." That's what I keep trying to tell him. It's not like I'm still hung up on the past. "Are you sure about that?" Micah's smile was playful, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made my pulse quicken. I laughed it off, but as I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me. The way he'd listened to every word like it mattered. The way he'd made me feel interesting and desirable and alive. Owen was already asleep in the spare room when I got home. I crept into our empty bedroom and lay awake thinking about roads not taken and the difference between safety and passion. The next morning, I woke up to find a new message from Micah. Had such a great time catching up last night. We should do it again soon. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Definitely. It was nice to feel like myself again. It was a dangerous message to send, loaded with implications I wasn't quite ready to examine. But it felt good to type the words, to acknowledge that something had been missing from my life. Something that had nothing to do with Owen's hurt feelings, and everything to do with the way Micah had made me remember who I used to be. Over the next week, Micah and I exchanged more messages. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but intimate in a way that made my heart race. He sent me photos from his gigs, asked about my day, remembered details from our conversations. Meanwhile, Owen continued his polite distance. He'd moved more of his things to the spare room and started coming home later from work. When I asked about it, he said he was busy with a new project. "What kind of project?" I pressed. "Just work stuff. Nothing you'd be interested in." The dismissive tone stung more than I wanted to admit. When had I become someone whose interests didn't matter to my own husband? I started meeting Micah for coffee once a week, always at different places, always with the excuse that I was running errands or meeting friends. We never did anything inappropriate, just talked and laughed, and remembered what it felt like to be young and full of possibilities. But I was careful about my digital footprint. I didn't post photos of our meetings or check in at the cafes we visited. Some instinct told me to keep these encounters private, though I told myself it was just to avoid giving Owen more ammunition for his sulking. What I didn't realize was that Owen had stopped sulking weeks ago. While I was rediscovering my past with Micah, my husband was quietly documenting my present. Every late night, every changed story about where I'd been, every time I smiled at my phone and quickly closed it when he walked into the room. Owen had always been methodical, but I'd mistaken his silence for defeat. I thought I was being clever, keeping my harmless friendship with Micah under the radar, while waiting for Owen to get over his wounded pride. I had no idea that my husband had already moved past hurt and into something far more dangerous, cold, calculated planning. The first sign that something had shifted came 3 weeks after my initial coffee date with Micah. I was getting ready for work when I noticed Owen sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, a cup of coffee, and what looked like a spreadsheet. "What are you working on so early?" I asked, trying to peek at his screen. He closed the laptop smoothly. "Just organizing some files. You know how I am about keeping things in order." "Yes," I thought as I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I knew exactly how Owen was about keeping things in order. What I didn't know was that I had just become one of those things he intended to organize right out of his life. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I'd just returned from another coffee date with Micah, our fourth in 2 weeks, when I found Owen waiting for me in the living room with a manila folder on his lap. "We need to talk," he said, his voice eerily calm. My heart started pounding, but I forced a casual smile. "Of course. Let me just change out of these wet clothes. Sit down, Zephyra." Something in his tone made me freeze. This wasn't the hurt, emotional Owen from the anniversary party. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and controlled, and absolutely certain of himself. I sat down on the edge of the couch, suddenly aware of how loud the rain sounded against our windows. "Where were you tonight?" Owen asked. "I told you, having coffee with Tara. Her divorce is getting messy and she needed to vent." Owen nodded thoughtfully, then opened the manila folder. He pulled out a photograph, a clear shot of me and Micah sitting across from each other at a corner table in Grind Coffee, both of us laughing. My mouth went dry. "Funny thing about Tara," Owen continued conversationally. "I ran into her at the grocery store this afternoon. She mentioned she hasn't seen you in weeks, been too busy with her divorce proceedings to socialize. I stared at the photograph, my mind racing. Owen, I can explain. Can you? Because I have more photos. He spread them out on the coffee table like playing cards. October 15th at Cafe Luna. October 22nd at that new place on 3rd Street. October 29th at Grind Coffee again. November 5th at the bookstore cafe on campus. Each photograph was like a punch to the gut. Me and Micah, leaning close across small tables, our body language intimate and familiar. How did you get these? I hired a private investigator. Owen's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Turns out it's not that expensive to have someone followed when they're being incredibly predictable about their patterns. The room started spinning. You had me followed? I had my wife followed. My wife, who's been lying to me for weeks about where she spends her Thursday evenings. My wife, who's been having secret meetings with her ex-boyfriend while telling me I'm overreacting to her public humiliation of our marriage. It's not what you think. What do I think, Zafira? Tell me what I think. I opened my mouth, then closed it, because the truth was, I didn't know what he thought. The man sitting across from me was a stranger, calm and methodical, and 3 steps ahead of me in a game I hadn't even realized we were playing. We're just friends, I said finally. We were just talking. Owen pulled out his phone and started reading. It was nice to feel like myself again. You always did understand me better than anyone else. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed together. My text messages. He was reading my private text messages with Micah. How did you... We share a phone plan, remember? And you've never been very good with privacy settings. He scrolled through more messages. Owen doesn't appreciate how lucky he is. You make me remember what passion feels like. I miss being with someone who really sees me. Each message sounded worse when Owen read it aloud in his flat, emotionless voice. Stripped of context and emotion, they sounded like exactly what they were, the words of a married woman falling for another man. Owen, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for weeks? How you've been carrying on an emotional affair with your ex-boyfriend while making me feel crazy for being upset about your anniversary speech? It's not an affair. We haven't done anything physical. Yet. The word hung in the air between us like a blade. But you were planning to, weren't you? All those messages about meeting somewhere more private. About how you deserve to be happy. I felt tears starting to build behind my eyes. I was confused. I was hurt that you were being so cold to me. I was being cold. Owen's composure finally cracked, just slightly. I was being cold because my wife humiliated me in front of 50 people and then acted like I was being unreasonable for having feelings about it. I was being cold because every time I tried to talk to you about how much you'd hurt me, you made it my fault for being too sensitive. That's not... It is. He gathered up the photographs with methodical precision. You know what the worst part is? If you'd just apologized, really apologized, after the anniversary party, we could have worked through it. But instead, you decided to prove your point by running to the man you compared me to. The tears were flowing freely now. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Owen. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. No. The word was final. We can't. He stood up and walked to the hall closet, pulling out a suitcase I hadn't seen him pack. Where are you going? To my sister's house. I'll be back this weekend to get the rest of my things. What about Ava? For the first time, his composure wavered slightly. I'll pick her up from school tomorrow and explain that Daddy and Mommy need some time apart. She'll stay with me on weekends. Owen, please, don't do this. Don't break up our family over a few coffee dates. He turned back to me, and I was shocked by the exhaustion in his eyes. I'm not breaking up our family, Zafira. You did that the moment you decided that your hurt feelings justified betraying our marriage. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. He headed toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope Micah makes you happy. I hope he's everything you remember him being. because you've burned down everything we built together to find out. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone in our living room, with the rain and the photographs, and the devastating realization that I had lost my husband not in a moment of passion, but in a series of small choices that had led me so far from home, I couldn't find my way back. I called Micah through my tears, needing someone to tell me I wasn't the villain in this story. But when I told him what had happened, there was a long pause before he responded. "Damn, Zeph. I didn't realize things were that serious with your husband. Maybe we should cool it for a while, let things settle down." The line went dead, and I realized that the man I'd risked everything for was already backing away from the wreckage of my marriage. I was truly alone. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick envelope. Ava had already left for school with Owen. They'd developed a new routine over the past month where he picked her up every morning, and I barely saw him except in passing. I sat at my kitchen table and read through the documents with growing horror. Owen wasn't just asking for a divorce. He was asking for primary custody of Ava, citing emotional instability and infidelity as grounds for his request. My hands shook as I called the number listed for his attorney. "This is insane," I told the receptionist. "My husband is trying to take my daughter away from me over a few coffee dates." "Ma'am, you'll need to speak with your own attorney about the specifics of the case. I can tell you that Mr. Cole has provided extensive documentation to support his claims." Documentation? Of course he had. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Hendricks, who listened to my story with professional sympathy before delivering the bad news. "Your husband has been very thorough," she said, spreading Owen's evidence across her conference table. "Photos, text messages, phone records, bank statements showing cash withdrawals that correspond to your meeting times. He's also got witness statements." Witness statements? From the private investigator, obviously, but also from your daughter's teacher, who noted that Ava seemed distressed and confused about her parents' relationship. From neighbors who observed you leaving the house at unusual times. From your own mother, actually. My blood ran cold. "My mother gave a statement." Patricia consulted her notes. "She confirmed that you'd been seeking excitement outside your marriage, and that she'd encouraged you to follow your heart despite your marital status. She seemed to think she was helping your case." Of course she did. My mother had always believed that women should take what they wanted from life, consequences be damned. She'd probably thought she was painting me as a strong, independent woman instead of an unfaithful wife. "What about the anniversary speech?" I asked desperately. "That's what started all of this. He was being cold and distant, and I was just trying to reconnect with someone who appreciated me." Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Cole, I need you to understand something. Your husband's attorney is going to paint a picture of a woman who publicly humiliated her spouse, then began an affair with the man she'd compared him to. The timeline is very damaging. It wasn't an affair. You exchanged intimate messages with another man. You lied to your husband about where you were going. You met this man in secret multiple times over the course of several weeks. In the eyes of the court, the distinction between emotional and physical infidelity is largely irrelevant." I slumped back in my chair. "So what are my options?" "We can fight the custody arrangement, but I have to be honest. Your husband has a strong case. He's been the primary breadwinner, he's documented your deceptive behavior, and he's presented himself as the stable parent throughout this process." "What do you mean, stable parent?" Patricia pulled out another document. "He's already enrolled Ava in counseling to help her process the divorce. He's maintained consistent work hours and living arrangements. He's provided detailed schedules showing how he plans to maintain her routine. Meanwhile, your behavior over the past few months suggests someone who's prioritizing her own emotional needs over her family's stability." The words hit me like physical blows. I was trying to save my marriage by finding myself again. I understand that's how you saw it, but that's not how it's going to look to a judge. I left Patricia's office feeling like I was drowning. Everything Owen had done, the cold distance, the methodical documentation, the careful planning, it had all been leading to this moment. While I'd been playing out some romantic fantasy with Micah, my husband had been building an airtight case for why I was an unfit wife and mother. That evening, I tried calling Owen directly. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "We can communicate through our attorneys." "Owen, please. This is about Ava. You can't take her away from me." There was a long pause. "I'm not taking her away from you, Zafira. You'll have visitation rights. But she needs stability right now, and you've proven that you're not capable of providing that. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. You made a series of deliberate choices over the course of months. You lied to me, you lied to our daughter, and you carried on an emotional affair with another man. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. I was hurt. So was I. But I didn't run to another woman. I didn't lie and sneak around and betray our marriage vows. I tried to work through it with you, and you responded by proving that everything I was afraid of was true." I could hear Ava's voice in the background, asking if she could have ice cream with dinner. The normalcy of it, the life continuing without me, made my chest ache. "She's my daughter too," I whispered. "Yes, she is, and she loves you, but she also needs to see that actions have consequences, and that the adults in her life can be trusted to tell the truth. Right now, I'm the only parent she has who meets that criteria." The line went dead. I spent the next 2 hours sitting on my kitchen floor, crying until I had no tears left. When I finally pulled myself together enough to think clearly, I realized that Micah hadn't called or texted me in over a week. I found him at Grind Coffee, playing to a sparse Thursday night crowd. When his set ended, I approached his table. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I've been trying to reach you." He looked uncomfortable. "Yeah, I've been meaning to call you back. Things have been crazy with work. Owen filed for divorce. He's trying to take Ava away from me." Micah's eyes widened. "Shit, Zeph, I'm sorry. That's really heavy. I need you to give a statement to my lawyer about our relationship, about how it was just friendship, about how I never cheated on my marriage." The silence stretched between us for a long moment. "The thing is," Micah said finally, "I don't know if I can do that." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it wasn't just friendship, was it? Not really. We both felt something happening between us. And those text messages..." He shook his head. "I can't lie under oath, Zeph." I stared at him, feeling the last piece of my world crumble. "So you're abandoning me too?" "I'm not abandoning you, but I can't get involved in your divorce. I've got my own life to think about, and getting dragged into a custody battle isn't part of my plan." He stood up, slinging his guitar case over his shoulder. "I'm sorry things worked out this way. I really am. But maybe this is for the best. Maybe you and Owen just weren't right for each other." He walked away, leaving me alone at the small table where we'd shared so many intimate conversations. The conversations that had cost me everything. I sat there until the cafe closed, finally understanding what Owen had tried to tell me that night in our living room. I hadn't just made a mistake. I'd made a choice, a series of choices that had led me away from my family and toward a man who disappeared the moment things got complicated. The worst part was that I still didn't know if I was sorry for the right reasons. Was I sorry for hurting Owen and potentially losing Ava? Or was I just sorry that my choices had consequences I hadn't anticipated? As I drove home to my empty house, I realized it didn't matter anymore. Owen was gone, Micah was gone, and soon Ava might be gone too. All I had left was the truth I'd been avoiding for months. I had destroyed my marriage not in a moment of passion, but in a series of small betrayals that had added up to something unforgivable. And unlike my husband, I had no plan for what came next. The custody hearing was scheduled for a cold December morning, exactly 8 months after the anniversary party that had started it all. I sat in the courthouse hallway, wearing my most conservative suit, watching Owen confer quietly with his attorney at the other end of the corridor. He looked good, calm, professional, like a man who had his life together. I felt like a fraud in my borrowed confidence, knowing that everyone in that courtroom would soon hear the detailed account of my deception. Patricia sat beside me, reviewing her notes one final time. "Remember," she said quietly, "show remorse, but don't grovel. Acknowledge your mistakes, but emphasize your love for Ava and your commitment to being a better mother going forward." I nodded, but my attention was caught by a familiar figure walking down the hallway. Natalie, Owen's sister, was approaching with a woman I didn't recognize, someone in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Who's that with Natalie?" I asked Patricia. She consulted her witness list. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Ava's therapist. She'll be testifying about your daughter's emotional state during the separation." My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized that Owen had been taking Ava to therapy, or that the therapist would be speaking against me in court. When we were finally called into the courtroom, I felt like I was walking to my execution. Judge Morrison was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who had a reputation for being tough on custody cases. Owen's attorney went first, methodically laying out the timeline of my deception. The anniversary speech, captured on video, and played for the court. The photographs of my meetings with Micah, displayed on a large screen for everyone to see. The text messages, read aloud in the attorney's crisp, professional voice. Each piece of evidence felt like a nail in my coffin. But the worst part was watching Ava's therapist take the stand. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Chen testified, "Ava is struggling with feelings of confusion and abandonment related to her mother's behavior. She's expressed anxiety about whether her parents are telling her the truth about their relationship, and she's shown signs of regression in her emotional development." "Can you elaborate on that?" Owen's attorney asked. "She's begun having nightmares about her family disappearing. She's become clingy with her father and withdrawn around her mother. These are classic symptoms of a child who's lost trust in her primary caregivers." I wanted to object, to explain that I'd never meant to hurt Ava, that everything I'd done was because I was trying to find my way back to being a good wife and mother. But Patricia had warned me to stay quiet, unless directly questioned. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to follow Patricia's advice. I acknowledged my mistakes, expressed remorse for the pain I'd caused, and emphasized my love for my daughter. But under cross-examination, Owen's attorney systematically dismantled my defense. "Mrs. Cole, you testified that you were confused and hurt by your husband's reaction to your anniversary speech. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And in response to feeling hurt, you began secretly meeting with your ex-boyfriend." "It wasn't like that." "Please answer yes or no. Did you begin secretly meeting with Mr. Drew in response to feeling hurt by your husband?" I hesitated. "Yes." "And during these secret meetings, did you discuss your marriage with Mr. Drew?" "Sometimes." "Did you tell Mr. Drew that your husband doesn't appreciate how lucky he is?" Yes." "Did you tell Mr. Drew that you missed being with someone who really sees you?" Each question was like a scalpel, cutting away my justifications until only the ugly truth remained. Yes, I had betrayed my husband's trust. Yes, I had lied repeatedly. Yes, I had prioritized my own emotional needs over my family's stability. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, I knew I had lost. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. Owen would have primary custody of Ava, with me receiving supervised visitation every other weekend until I completed counseling and demonstrated a pattern of stable, trustworthy behavior. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through my chest. I looked across the courtroom at Owen, hoping to see some flicker of the man who had once loved me enough to marry me. Instead, I saw a stranger who had methodically and legally removed me from his life. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I remained seated, stunned by the completeness of my defeat. Patricia gathered her papers and offered some words about appeals and future modifications, but I barely heard her. Owen approached my table as the courtroom emptied. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "this wasn't about revenge. This was about protecting Ava." I looked up at him, this man I had lived with for 5 years and apparently never really known. "I loved you," I said, the words coming out as barely a whisper. "I know you did. In your way." His expression softened slightly. "But love isn't enough when it comes without respect or honesty. Ava deserves better than that. We both did." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you get the help you need. I hope you figure out what you're really looking for. Because whatever it wasn't me, and it wasn't the life we built together." I watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty courtroom. Through the tall windows, I could see Natalie waiting in the hallway with Ava, who was holding a small backpack and looking nervous. My daughter, who would now grow up thinking of me as the parent who couldn't be trusted, who would spend weekends with me under supervision, like I was some kind of threat to her well-being. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had started this whole mess by making a thoughtless comment about adventure and excitement. I had wanted to feel alive, to recapture some sense of passion and spontaneity. Instead, I had lost everything that actually mattered. As I finally stood to leave the courtroom, I caught my reflection in one of the tall windows. I looked older than my 35 years, worn down by months of legal battles and the weight of my own choices. The woman staring back at me was exactly what Owen had said I was, someone who had loved in her own way, but without the respect and honesty that real love required. I had spent months telling myself that I was misunderstood, that my family didn't appreciate my complexity, that I deserved more excitement and passion than my marriage provided. But standing alone in that empty courtroom, I finally understood the truth that everyone else had seen months ago. I had traded my family's happiness for a fantasy that disappeared the moment it became inconvenient for the man I'd risked everything to pursue. The anniversary speech had been the beginning, but this was the end. Not with dramatic confrontations or passionate declarations, but with legal documents and supervised visitation schedules, and the quiet devastation of a man who had loved me enough to fight for our daughter's future, even when he couldn't fight for our marriage anymore. I walked out of the courthouse into the cold December air, alone with the consequences of every choice I'd made since that night when I'd compared my husband to my ex-boyfriend in front of 50 people who had all seen what I'd refused to acknowledge. Owen had been right about one thing. I had gotten exactly what I'd asked for. I just hadn't realized how much it would cost.